Welcome to Don't Ask That Question. I'm Kelly O'Mara, and today we're going to talk about the recent school shootings and whether or not there's a right of the people to see the mental health records of these perpetrators. My guests are Sheila Matthews and former Connecticut State Senator Joseph Markley. Sheila is the co-founder of Able Child, a nonprofit assisting parents who are confronted with demands to drug their children. She has testified before state legislatures and Congress to restrict school personnel from recommending psychiatric behavioral drugs to school-age children. And she's testified before the FDA about adding black box warnings for suicidality on antidepressants. She also worked with Diane Sawyer's year-long investigation of the drugging of foster children. Former Senator Joseph Markley served the 16th District of Connecticut between 1995 and 1997 and 2011 and 2019, and was the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor in 2018. He crafted legislation for the first home care program for seniors and organized the massive Axe the Tax rally to fight Connecticut's proposed state tax increase. Joe is a tireless advocate for limited government, fiscal responsibility, and personal liberty. After the tragedy of Sandy Hook, he supported Able Child's efforts on legislation to force the release of mental health records of these school shooters. And I guess this is where we'll start. I want to thank you both for coming on. If there ever was a need for mental health information about these shooters, I think it is now. In the wake of the Uvalde shooting down in Texas, both of you have plenty of experience about the need for shedding light on the mental health issues of these perpetrators, having lived right there in Connecticut during the Sandy Hook shooting with Adam Lanza. So welcome.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the efforts that were undertaken to obtain the mental health records of Adam Lanza, who was responsible for Sandy Hook. While we know that at some point Lanza was receiving mental health treatment, we never were allowed to see the actual mental health records. Sheila, what were your efforts in getting that information released, and what was the response from the state of Connecticut?
Well, I went with another mother who I helped through my nonprofit, Able Child, actually lived down the street from Sandy Hook Elementary School, and we set out and we gathered over 300 signatures within several hours, demanding the release of the mental health records and the toxicology report. We took those signatures and we went to the chief medical examiner's office and went to lawmakers. I created a packet that was distributed to every lawmaker in the state of Connecticut, asking to focus on getting that critical piece of data during the investigation. So that's how it started. And we were met with a lot of blowback. You know, we even just collecting the signatures, we had the police come and shut us down and threaten us. And that's when I went to an attorney, Jonathan E. Moore, who then filed actual request through the chief medical examiner's office for the mental health records and the toxicology report.
Okay, so how long was it after that you actually got some sort of response from the state?
We received a letter in the mail saying that they were not going to release them to us. And then we went through a process through the Freedom of Information, where it was months later, where we had a hearing before the FOIA Commission in Connecticut. And so it was quite some time. And my organization was actually battling with the Hartford Courant on the information they were leaking, selective information. And so I was engulfed in writing back with the newspaper and going to prepare for the court proceeding.
What happened in the court proceeding?
It was really interesting. There was a woman that she was to take the information in, and it was a small little, like a little trial where you produced information and she interpreted it. And so we were presenting our case, and it was a constitutional based case because Able Child represents the public. We're a nonprofit, so we are the voice of the public. And then we had all the town people in Newtown backing us up for this request for the toxicology and mental health records. So I was stunned because we presented our case, and then the Assistant Attorney General presented his case, and he basically said that he didn't want to release the records to my organization because he felt like we were not going to use them for good, and that it would really empower people to not comply with their doctors, and that it would cause a lot of people to go off their medications, which I thought that was a stunning omission. Mm-hmm. That, okay, you're not going to release this information because you're afraid that the consumer might make an informed decision and think that these drugs are too dangerous. I was stunned.
Well, it's almost like, well, the public will glean some information that we don't want them to have, such as, okay, this shooter was on X, Y, and Z. So they don't want the public to know that, because then parents, of course, will go, oh, you know, I don't know if I want my son to take these because I've heard and I've read, and, you know, it's very interesting that the pharmaceuticals seem to be protected from any kind of discussion about mental health records. It's like, it's just not going to happen. There's too much money behind it. Do you think it's the money?
Oh, I think it's definitely the money. I think that it's definitely that we have a captive audience in the school system and the information getting to parents. So that kind of information that would never do well in a parent's hand, because if there's not everybody's going to react that way to the drugs, but if there's a percentage of these people taking the drugs and the school shooters, then, like you said, they might make an informed decision. So I believe that there's a lot of pharmaceutical money behind it. I feel as though when I went up to the Capitol to work on bills, I was up against, that's who I was up against, you know. All we wanted was more information to the parent.
So Joe, you know, do you recall that time when, you know, directly after Sandy Hook, and there was, you know, great screaming for gun control, and was there any discussion that you were aware of any legislators saying, hey, you know, we're going to look at the mental health records? Any of that at all?
No, the only person that brought that up to me at all was Sheila. And, you know, the amazing thing about this, I think the power of the pharmaceutical companies is part of the story somewhere in the background. But if you're in the legislature, and I think this is true in the media, I think this is true in a lot of places, I think it's the power of accepted wisdom to some extent. That I always feel like one of the great difficulties of being a legislator is to be able to hear somebody out and then say, no, I don't believe you. When they have credentials, when they have, you know, degrees and official positions and so forth. Right. And the pressure of the legislature, there were basically, the decision very early was made in reaction to Sandy Hook. We're going to do three things. And I didn't support the bill that passed, but the three things that were included in it were gun control legislation, which is a different subject, but one that I think didn't do anything. Nothing we passed would have prevented what happened at Sandy Hook. School security, which really wasn't followed through on. And the third was more mental health treatment. There was never any question about whether the mental health treatment was good or bad. Right. It was simply a matter of saying we need more of it. And obviously the first thing you would ask if you wanted to say we need more treatment, is what treatment was this particular young man receiving? And the very fact, as Sheila said, that one of the arguments against giving the information out was that it would discourage people from taking the medications, the drugs, whatever you want to call them, seems to be proof that that the shooter was taking those drugs. Otherwise, why would they be wanting to keep that information secret? And the secrecy of the whole thing was rather remarkable. Again, as a legislator, we really weren't told anything more than was available in the media. And as Sheila pointed out, that what was available in the media was very kind of a carefully crafted narrative that was leaked out. The general facts of the case have never been made public. And certain stories have circulated for years that I don't think anyone has ever come up with any particular proof for, except they're kind of an accepted part of the story.
Right. So they want more mental health, which is what we're hearing now out of, Uvalde, Texas. We got to have more mental health treatment. In fact, I heard that Senator McConnell, is coming to Connecticut, and that's his big thing. Obviously we need more mental health. So I want to go off a little bit here and talk about the whole mental health, the psychiatric diagnosing. I wrote a book called Guns and Doses. I wrote an article called Guns and Doses, and I wrote a book called Psyched Out. And it's about the fraud of psychiatric diagnosing. And so when people go to a psychiatrist or even their family doctor, because most prescribing now of psychiatric drugs is done by the family doctor, okay? And so when they are diagnosing you, they're asking you behavioral questions. Like in the case of ADHD, there are 18 criteria. He raises his hand out of turn, talks out of turn, wiggles in his chair. If he meets 3 of the 18, he's got ADHD. So my argument when I wrote my book was there's no science or medicine associated with psychiatric diagnosing. In other words, an objective, confirmable abnormality. That's what science and medicine look at. Like, for example, if you break your leg, they can take an X-ray and go, oh, yep, we've seen that before. That's a broken bone right there, right? And they can do it over and over and over. It's going to be the same thing every time. With psychiatric diagnosing, there is no test known to man. In other words, you can't take a CAT scan or a PET scan or a P test or a blood test or an X-ray. There is no objective test to find any objective confirmable abnormality in the brain for any psychiatric diagnosis, any of them. And there's like, I think 400 and some in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. So if people really understood that when they go to their doctor, really what he's saying is your behavior, okay, we're looking at your behavior and we can change it with these drugs. These drugs will change your behavior. So what we don't know is whether it will change it in a good way or a bad way, right? It's really dependent on each person who takes these drugs. There's also the problem with the chemical imbalance theory. Oh, you may be suffering from a chemical imbalance. Well, you may be and you may not be, frankly, because there's no test known to man to measure your brain chemicals unless it's at autopsy. So when people go into their doctor and, oh, well, you're depressed, you may be suffering from a chemical imbalance, they need to ask for the test. And if they don't have a test, then they need to ask, well, which particular things in my brain are out of whack? Well, I don't know. There's no way for them to know. It was a theory that was posited 40 years ago. So it's important for people to sort of grasp just that real basic information that all of psychiatric diagnosing is based on behavior responses, not actually on medicine or science. It just doesn't exist. So when we look at Adam Lanza, and we know that he was on Lexapro when he was at the Yale, whatever it was, the Yale Child
Study Center.
Yeah. So in my book, I wrote about many of these drugs. In fact, all the psychiatric drugs that are most often prescribed. So let's just read this. Forest Laboratories, Inc., the makers of the antidepressant Lexapro. And it says, as a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is an SSRI, Lexapro helps restore the brain's chemical balance by increasing the available supply of serotonin, a substance in the brain believed to influence your mood. Now, that's a lawyer word, believed, because they don't really know, right? And then it says the FDA, the mechanism of antidepressant action for Lexapro is presumed, another lawyer word, to be linked to the potentiation of serotonin activity in the central nervous system, resulting from its inhibition of CNS neuronal reuptake of serotonin. So in other words, it may be due to this, right? These are the key words. It's presumed, it's believed, and these are very lawyer words because they don't have any proof, science, medicine, that can say, yeah, if we increase the serotonin in the brain, this will reduce your, depression, anxiety, stress, whatever. So they have to use the lawyer words or they get sued because they know that. So the question then becomes, without getting too far into this, everybody's different. Everybody's chemical makeup is different. So what is the right amount of serotonin that we're going to give you, right? This young person, whose brain is not even developed until he's 21. How much are we going to give you? Are we going to give you a little bit to start with, and then we're going to up it and maybe give you a cocktail of drugs? They don't know. They don't know how this is going to affect them because everybody's, chemical makeup is different. So it's a very scary process just thinking about it. But parents aren't told this. They aren't explained all of this when they're given the drugs, right? Because they trust their doctors. They trust what they're saying. Oh, of course they have my son or daughter's best interest at heart when they're, prescribing these drugs. And by the way, all of the antidepressants that are on the market except Prozac, all of them have not been approved for children under 18, except Prozac. That's the only one. So they're writing these scripts for these kids off label. They can write it off label if they think this will really help them. In other words, it's not been approved, but we can go ahead and give it to these kids. That's a crapshoot. There's a reason why they haven't been prescribed. Why they haven't been approved for kids. So then we get into the bigger problem, which is, what if they do go off on these drugs? Do the people have the right to know? And this is what we're dealing with in Uvalde, right? You spoke to somebody this morning, Sheila, I recall, and they apparently shipped his body to a different county in San Antonio.
Here's the thing, one of the upset that I feel like not only my organization, but throughout the country is this rush to judgment, this rush to legislate when the police investigation isn't even complete. So currently, I'm trying to track down the toxicology report and the school records. Same thing I did in Connecticut years ago for Adam Lanza, which are still missing and incomplete. We had the Child Advocate's Office put together a report on Adam Lanza, and we're still missing where he was in 8th grade, I believe. The psychiatrist that was treating Adam Lanza was known the night of the massacre. They knew his records, they knew who was treating him. It took my organization hounding the state of Connecticut's state attorney. I forgot his name at this point. Maybe Joe knows who that was at that time. I hounded him to get the treating psychiatrist's name released, and it took a year for the state to even release the psychiatrist's name that was treating Adam Lanza, yet they go after the guns. So I've spent the last 3 days, I don't know what day we are now into this Texas massacre.
I think it's day 8.
Okay, so it has taken me about three days to find out who's in charge of the information regarding the toxicology report and where this body is being held. I think it's imperative because I don't know if Joe remembers, but during Adam Lanza's police investigation at the chief medical examiner's office, actually, the body was compromised. It was a small story about how one of the employees in the chief medical examiner's office had let one of their family members in to view the body, which I think was very bizarre, but that's a chain of custody issue. I mean, it's when you're doing, I mean, I'm not a trained police person, I'm a mother, but I have common sense. It doesn't make sense to me not to secure the body, do the toxicology, and find out what this kid was on. So
Right. Either way, whether he was or was not on drugs, it doesn't matter. We don't have an agenda here. Why? But this is the point. Why don't they want to know? Why don't they want to know?
It took me 3 days. So this morning I got off the phone with the justice of the peace, who is in charge actually of, he's a judge and he's in charge of securing the body for the process through the toxicology and the medical examiner's office. And I called him up and I asked him, he was very nice. And he said that I told him the situation. I was concerned about the chain of custody. And he says, well, the body went to an undisclosed location and then sent off to the medical examiner's office. And I thought that was strange. And then I asked him, well, how long is it going to take to get the toxicology report back? And the toxicology report back. And he said 3 to 4 months. And I thought to myself, we have Senator Mitch McConnell with the and this is not a Republican or Democrat, it's both of these parties running to go after these guns and make that the policy. And we have to wait 3 to 4 months to get this toxicology report, which I don't know, Joe, that doesn't make sense to me. In the state of Connecticut, like, why wouldn't you make special arrangements to get the toxicology report back within 2 or 3 weeks of a police investigation on this scale?
Well, because everybody has their own solution already in mind. They're just looking for the event which gives them an excuse to press for it. So on one hand, you have calls for gun control, which again are the same calls. It doesn't have anything to do with the specifics of what happened in this particular case. It's just, here's our agenda on gun control and we've got to go back to it. A background check, which seems to always be the number one thing. And after all, background checks are pretty much universal in most places. But it doesn't have anything to do with this case because there wasn't anything in this young man's background that would have prevented him from buying a firearm. Nonetheless, that's what comes forward. And on the other side, I will say something about it as being bipartisan. There's nothing more suspicious than when both parties line up instantly behind something. I think that's when people really ought to watch out. And it's unfortunate because I think the attitude, the general public would say, oh, isn't this wonderful? It's bipartisan. No, the fact that it's bipartisan means that the game is fixed. And you see this in all kinds of different areas in all these drug cases, in certain things in foreign relations. There's different issues where very quickly there's a consensus and you better line up with it or you're going to be seen as being an outlier and you might be accused of being of not accepting the science, for instance, and these different accusations that get thrown at.
But Joe, if legislators, if lawmakers don't have all the information, okay, in this case, the toxicology, okay, hearings were held long before the toxicology report was even released. Lawmakers can change that. Lawmakers can write laws that say this is how things must work. Why is that? Why does that never happen?
Well, it's funny if you think about the functioning of the legislature. And again, I think Sheila learned a lot about it or has learned a lot about it being up there. part of it is in Connecticut, you've got 187 legislators, but on a subject like this, only a handful have real input into what's going to happen. The leadership of the, not just the leadership of the committees, but actually the leadership of the caucuses, the Democratic and the Republican leaders are going to come together. They're going to call in the usual suspects and say, what are we going to do in response to this? And on the mental health side of it, the usual suspects is more or less the mental health establishment, which says the answer to it is we need more access, we need more outreach, we need more oversight, but we need to make all this more available. There's almost no voices in this official world to say, are we going down the right path at all? And I'll say something to backtrack just a little bit with your indulgence. One of the things you were talking about is how these chemicals are different for every single person. And this is so important to understand. And I think in all of medicine as it's practiced in America now, that's not recognized. You break a bone, and setting the bone is pretty much going to be the same experience for everybody. But anything else that's kind of more complicated chemically in the body is going to differ from person to person. Okay, if we can admit that, the second thing becomes how much oversight are the doctors giving the patients when they prescribe these pills? I suspect that both of you, and I suspect anybody who's watching this, has had enough experience, either personally or with people that they know, who've been given psychiatric drugs, to realize how little oversight there is, how little follow-up there is, and partly, I don't even blame the doctors altogether. It's partly because the doctors are in a position where they're getting people in and out of their office in 15 minutes. They can't sit and spend a great deal of time with them. So these chemicals are just being dumped out there based on what they think is the kind of a baseline response. And how many times it doesn't have to go bad too many times to result in the kinds of tragedies we're seeing. I mean, 1 in 1,000 cases of a severe reaction is more than what would be necessary to have these school shootings.
Exactly. It's interesting. I'm gonna if you look at the package inserts of antidepressants, it advises you on the package insert, and this is where I wonder, if parents are really, clued into exactly what they're giving their kids, because some of the adverse events include mania, psychosis, abnormal behavior, violence, and there's a black box warning on all of the antidepressants except Prozac, that it'll cause suicidality in many people. All right. I mean, this is the FDA black box warning is basically the last step before the FDA withdraws a drug from the market. I mean, it's a big deal for a black box warning. So here you have kids, 18 and under, their brains aren't even developed. We have, thousands of infants are on antidepressants. Okay. I think right now there are 10 million kids under the age of 18 who are taking antidepressants. And we're not even getting into the antipsychotics and the anti-anxiety drugs and the cocktails that are given these people, right? So we know what the adverse events can be, right? So it blows my mind that we can't get lawmakers to understand that knowing these kids' mental health records may actually provide good information to fix the problem for the next time. You know what I mean? We start to see a pattern, right? That these school shooters, the only thing they have in common were the fact that they were all on psych drugs. Okay. So it's unconscionable to me that we have Mitch McConnell, who's ready to go up to Connecticut and have a hearing about taking away guns and then pour more money into mental health. I would feel like, you're doing a real disservice at that point.
It's awfully hard to change a whole mindset when you have gotten into this frame of mind that this is the way it's got to be done. And what we're doing, we just need more of it. The problem isn't that we're going down the wrong road. The problem is we haven't gone far enough down the wrong road. And I think it's going to be a while. And if these incidents don't bring people to their senses, it's hard to imagine what would, because it's impossible to think of anything worse than what's happened with these school shootings. This ought to be a wake-up call to say we're going about this the wrong way. But everybody goes back to their almost their comfort zone for the answer. So it's guns, it's violent video games, it's the breakdown of the family, it's toxic masculinity, and all of these things may be contributing to the mental health problems that we're seeing. Because it's not to say that these kids are solely the victims of the drugs that they're taking. I think that anybody would believe that the kids were taking the drugs because there was something going amiss. But nobody wants to look at the drugs, and the drugs. And the other, it requires going up. If you're in Connecticut as a legislator, and if you're a legislator, chances are you're a retired school teacher, or you're a part-time real estate agent, or you're just a regular person. And in walks the Yale professor of XYZ and says, of course, we all understand that whatever. And it's very hard at that point. It's the old story of the emperor's new clothes. But it's very hard to be the person that says, I don't believe that's true, when you don't have the credentials to challenge it. All you have is a gut instinct or your common sense. And I think it's very important that people keep raising this alarm. But it's going to have to, that bell's going to have to ring a number of times before people wake up.
Well, the fear, if they don't, is that they're going to pour an enormous amount of additional funding into mental health treatment, which we all know means more drugging. Okay. Yeah. And it's not going to go away. These situations are going to continue to happen. And that is the crime. That's the real crime. They don't have to keep happening. And again, we're not asking for big things here, right? We're asking for the shooter's mental health records.
Here's the thing, in the Sandy Hook police investigation, which we combed through box by box, there was actually the big damning piece of evidence there was Adam Lanza's mother, Nancy, interacting with Yale Child Studies Center when she went there and complained that her son was having an adverse event to one of the drugs. And the nurse's response was, she's non-compliance. And, you know, it wasn't that Adam Lanza lacked mental health or access to it. He went to the best. He was going to Yale. And so, you know, that was an eye-opener for me, is when they created this committee on, and I know Joe is aware of it, that Sandy Hook lessons learned, and they called all these experts in, and it was just a round, it just never went anywhere. They never looked at the records of this boy. They never called to account the psychiatrist that was treating him, that actually was involved in a sexual abuse of another patient of his, and where I literally was calling the state prosecutors saying, you need to call this guy to account. And the Homeland Security ended up arresting him when he came back from New Zealand, where he escaped to after Sandy Hook. You know, this, like Joe said, this was never reported. It was never reported on the backstory of Adam Lanza's mental health treatment that he did receive, and the fact that he was seen by Danbury Hospital. You know, this is a crime against humanity when we allow this to continue like this. You know, these crimes are never solved. I mean, we're not stupid people. I mean, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, after a while, you're like, wait a minute, wasn't there video? Why can't we look at the video? And
yeah, I want to just insert something here about this video. Remember the investigation, you know, it's like 7,000 pages, the Connecticut police report. So I read every single page. I printed out 700 pages of that investigation because there was so many weird things in it. I'll just put it that way. But, you know, it said that Adam Lanza used to go to the movie theater and do that dance video thing where he'd step on the different dance moves, and to the point where he would become exhausted. like it was obsessive, right? However, if you read the Connecticut, police in his room, he had videos of, shooters and guns. Why wasn't he doing that out at the movie theater? I mean, I just find it odd that the one thing that everybody actually knew he was doing was this dance thing at the theater, where they had other, games that he could have been doing. Instead, it's all about the guns. He was raised with guns. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I think the Hartford Courant, actually, when I go back to the case Able Child versus the chief medical examiner and the work that we did, really from a grassroots aspect of brave parents in Sandy Hook, in Newtown, that signed a petition saying, we want these records, and submitting all that process, I just feel as though the entire process was already, like Joe says, predetermined. And, looking at, I think that going forward, how do we change this? I guess I just feel as though if we can get the mental health records going forward, we can stop this rush to legislation. But I think the Hartford Courant was dripping out information. And where were they getting that information? It was being released. I don't know if it was through the state police. There's a corruption element here for me that really needs to be looked at. And it's so obvious in this Texas timeline and how it's changing. We deserve better, and I think that these committees that are set up in the legislature, like Joe, like the usual suspects that come in, and we have to start auditing where this money is going to in mental health, and is it effective? These kids often are on multiple amounts of drugs. The piece that I did with Diane Sawyer in the state of Connecticut, the foster care kids, like you were saying, very young, holding up bags of multiple amounts of psychiatric drugs. This is the public health crisis, not the guns,
Yeah, as mysterious as it is what any of these drugs do, the interaction of the drugs is something that I don't think anyone even pretends to know. They seem to approach it more like a cook that says, well, I'll throw in a little more of this and I'll throw in a little more of that and see what happens. But the interactions are a mystery. And I always feel like after a certain amount of time, the baseline of what the child is underneath it all has been completely lost. We don't know anymore. All we know is the person as they present after they've been receiving all these different mysterious
Chemicals.
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, well, they're chemicals, and the chemicals do actually change their brain. That's a fact.
Yeah.
And pharmaceutical companies say Eli Lilly, the maker of Prozac, doesn't talk to Forest Labs and go, oh, we did a clinical trial where we took, we gave 20,000 patients your Lexapro and our Prozac at the same time. There's none of that going on. They're not sharing that information. They're not doing those clinical trials. They're not concerned with another pharmaceutical's drug, only their own. Okay. And so we don't know what these drugs are doing to these kids' brains, other than we do know that it does change your naturally occurring chemicals. You're no longer in your right mind. Let's put it that way. Once you start taking these drugs, you're no longer in your right mind that you were born with, because it has changed your chemical makeup. So Joe, here's what I don't understand.
Yeah.
Why can't legislators, and I know I was in Congress for almost 20 years. I worked for 4 members of Congress. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that legislation can be written that will say, look, this is how we're going to conduct these investigations. From now on, law enforcement in every state has to do A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. When they're conducting their investigation, when it comes to the, autopsy, the test for whether or not they're taking chemicals, that can be legislated. Why is it not being done?
Well, I assume you've been trying to do it, especially since you know your way around Congress to some extent. First of all, you kind of need a champion. You need somebody who's willing to say, okay, I'll take this issue on and I'll try to do it. And I was afraid that I would get to this subject by way of example at some point, but I stuck my neck out just a little ways on the issue of fluoride once upon a time in the legislature. And I was amazed. I don't regret doing it, but I was amazed at the abuse I took as a result of having even said the word fluoride. It's like, and again, not from the whoever, I don't even know who the fluoride producers of America are, right? It was from the dentists primarily who have simply bought into the idea that fluoride is wonderful and they don't want to hear anything else about it. And also from the press that says, oh, well, there's another nut talking about fluoride, like Dr. Strangelove, right?
Right.
And I think that's always part of the problem as a legislator. You don't want to be the guy that's seen as being a crank. And it takes a lot of confidence to stand up on it. Also, when it comes to the pharmaceuticals, there really is a huge financial interest that I think would go to work very quickly, not in an overt Dr. Evil kind of way, right? I mean, they're going to do it by saying just what the chief state's attorneys, the attorney said to you, Sheila, which is, if we talk about this, it's going to be discouraging to people. They're not going to get the kind of treatment that they want. We're doing a disservice, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing I'll say about this, not to get off on too much of a tangent. Another thing I think that we all have to understand, in my opinion, there isn't an evil cabal necessarily behind this. There's a lot of people whose self-interest in part has convinced them that what they're doing is a good thing. So, I mean, maybe there's someplace in a drug company, somebody who's saying, I don't care what happens, I want to make my billions. But I think more it's a case of people saying, hey, I'm doing real well. And by the way, we're helping out. And it's in everybody's interest that we keep this going. And that word just kind of permeates out, again, through the corporations, through the universities, and down through the lobbyists and down to the legislators, without it necessarily having to be a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy, it's a bunch of people acting individually in a way that benefits a certain point of view. And the point of view has to be ruptured. And I mean, there's plenty of people out there doing it. You go on YouTube and you can find psychiatrists and psychologists that are saying, I did this for years and now I know it's nonsense. But those voices are still lost, they're drowned by kind of the mainstream point of view.
Well, I also felt like in the aftermath of Sandy Hook that, I was up there in each hearing, which was packed with gun owners that these people took days off from work.
Oh, yeah.
In there, and it was amazing. I mean, I'm not a gun owner, and maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, but I mean, I love the Second Amendment. I love all the amendments. I love the Constitution, but they took time out of their day and they sat in these hearings, and I was amazed at how emotional, like just the divorce from reality versus how they were treating the Sandy Hook parents in making law. Now, my heart breaks for all the people that lose their lives in these senseless acts, these children, and the parents. I can't fathom it. And one of the reasons why I do this work is I never want it to happen. I want to get to the bottom of it, So I was amazed in the aftermath that, and I mentioned this to Kelly, how the state legislators moved to Sandy Hook, Newtown to hold the hearings. I thought that was, why would you do that? And then Obama flew them in the private plane down to work on gun control. I'm there by myself with an unfunded organization trying to get some records and trying to get attention on this issue and to be heard. And I just thought it was a conflict of these have become so political, so using these victims as a front for them to get legislation. Listen, if I was a parent and my child was, lost in one of these tragedies, I would be like, yeah, let's take everything away. Absolutely, take everything away. And I think that their intention, like us as people, as consumers, yeah, we want this to stop, but we have to have minds that get to the facts and have to I think that they have a conflict of interest. I've watched the Sandy Hook parents, and I think it's very tragic that they are going after anybody who's looking into alternative reasons. To me, that's tragic, because I can't imagine that that's their intent. I can only think that Sandy Hook Promise is very well funded. I question the funding, where that funding is coming from. I don't think that's fair. I think that we have to have a state house and a federal house that works for all the people. I think we should be able to have a conversation about the psychiatric industry. They're one of the most powerful industries. They're more powerful than the gun industry.
Yes, they are.
And I just want to have that conversation. I want to be able to have legislation that impacts the solution, that prevents this from happening. I can't imagine that any Sandy Hook parent, I've never had a problem with any of them, because I guess what triggered my mind is when you said the conspiracy. I don't think that there's a cabal behind a curtain myself. No. I think that these are well-meaning people, even people that I disagree with, and I've had my disagreements on both sides of the aisle. I don't think their intent is bad. I just think that my organization has never had a problem with the Sandy Hook parents. And I think because I've never said nobody ever died there or anything like that. I don't, and honestly, those words too are, I just think that's a sideshow. It's another red herring, my father used to say. It has nothing to do. We need to get minds that are at fact, not emotion.
It's like, look, if we look at Uvalde in Texas and we look at Sandy Hook and all the others, the gun is the weapon of death. And let's be honest, that weapon killed those people. But it's not the reason, okay? It's not getting us to a motive or a reason. And in this case, again, we're stuck going, well, geez, what put this kid over the top? What exactly, we know he came from a bad, family life, and the father wasn't in the picture, and he had some issues himself, being shy and had a lisp, and he was made fun of and bullied. And so we know all that, but there's a lot of bullied kids out there. There's a lot of kids that aren't that don't go and shoot up a school. Okay. Right. So the question is, again, coming full circle, why is there such a resistance to get people to have a conversation about psychiatric drugs, school shooters, and violence? And it's just not school shooters. There's an awful lot of violence that occurs by people who are on these drugs, that, it's on the news all the time. You just have to do the research to realize, oh yeah, they've been drugged,
Well, in an autopsy report, it says cause and manner, right? Cause, what is the cause and what is the manner? It's the same thing. It's like logic questions that you need to ask. I don't investigate things, but I just think you need to ask the right question. And I guess your question is, why aren't they? And I only can think that there's a lot of money at stake. And when I was in that hearing in the FOIA request, which has never been fulfilled for the people, is what he said. He's afraid that people will stop taking the pharmaceutical products. And strongly believe in informed consent. That's our mission statement. You get all the information, you make a decision. And you shouldn't be like Nancy Lanza's, the mother, called non-compliant
Mhm, and
when
coerced.
you report a side effect. Think about that. If Yale had acted differently in her complaint about the side effect of the drug, that conversation could have been different. And treatment can be different for people if they have a choice. But when you take choice away, I just think it's bad for the public. And so yes, the gun is the weapon that's picked up, but it's also used, guns are used for good to protect yourself from harm. So it's not gun bad. It's I think we just have to have a conversation about the drug aspect, because the drugs are a weapon as well. And
Right.
they're chemical assault on the child's brain. And when you drug somebody, there's birth to 3 mental health programs. When you drug them without any accountability, Diane Sawyer tried to hold foster care accountable with her report. We need more investigative reporters, and we need to have a freer press. And
I just want to interrupt you a minute, Sheila, because you use that word treatment. Okay. Adam Lanza's treatment. The fact of the matter is these drugs aren't treating any known abnormality. Everybody has to kind of get this into their head, because God knows for 4 decades we've been told this is treatment, and if you take this, you won't be depressed anymore, or you won't be stressed out or have anxiety or a zillion other things. It doesn't treat. None of these psychiatric drugs treat any known abnormality. And I think if they understand this, they can start to ask other questions. So we have to start speaking in the inaccurate, lingo.
It's no more treatment than alcohol. I mean,
Exactly.
it also does a great job of treating anxiety and changing your mood and everything else, but it doesn't leave you any better off once it wears off. You're still back in the same place. I think part of it, there's a comfort in having a narrative, in saying we have a way of understanding all this. We have a way of reacting to it all, and there's a buy-in with it. And the narrative with all of this is guns or more mental health or the breakdown of the family or whatever. And to push another narrative is to make everyone very nervous all of a sudden, and they lose their footing. And another thing you mentioned, investigative reporters. Reporting is just it's disappearing. The investigative reporters are folks like you, in a sense, that are digging around to unearth things. But you're out there with thousands of other people that are weighing in on stuff. But the idea of the days of the Hartford Courant or CBS News being able to devote lots of reporters' time to say, okay, go out and follow that story, and if it takes weeks, it's going to be weeks. They don't do it. That's just gone. And we've got to do it ourselves, and then we've got to try to convince people that we're worth listening to.
But so in the case of Uvalde, we're being told it'll be 3 to 4 months before the toxicology report will be released. That's insanity. Now, again, where are lawmakers? Where is Mitch McConnell? Does Mitch McConnell know this? Certainly, he could say, this is not acceptable. We need to have that information before we can decide how we're going to, change the laws. Where are the people? Where are our lawmakers who standing up saying, wait a minute, 4 months for a toxicology report?
It's 3 letters. Why? Why is it going to take 4 months? Whose interests are being served by having it take so long? You're telling me that this can't be moved to the front of the line?
That's what he said. That's what he said. He said that it was because of COVID. And the interesting part, I mean, he was very nice, the man, but he said, what bothered me most was that the body was moved to an undisclosed location. And I'm like, why did you make those special arrangements to do that, but you're not going to make special arrangements to get this toxicology report within a week or 2 weeks? I'll even give you 2 weeks. But yeah, I was really kind of shocked with the procedure out there. I mean, it really seems to me like a big problem on the ground there. And, you know, in Sandy Hook, I was up in Sandy Hook probably a week after it happened, and they had, that place was on lockdown, you know, and it was very crafted. Sandy Hook was very managed. They already had the committee set up with the legislation. They had the title of all the hearings, I believe, Joe, was gun violence. And there was already titled hearings, you know, so it's just unfortunate. It is, it's critical that we start to look at the facts on the ground without being so emotional. You know, if you ask a question, you're a conspiracy person, or, I mean, I think that's ridiculous. And then, Joe, you have to remember, in the aftermath too, they wanted to start pushing the screening in. Joe did a lot of work in, I know he wouldn't say so, but in homeschooling, they went after the homeschooling people, because they wanted to have all the children mentally screened that weren't in the system. They were homeschooling, had nothing to do with this at all in Sandy Hook. And so the homeschoolers took to, which I have to say, they're so brave, and any work up at the state capitol from a grassroots level usually comes from the homeschoolers. And Joe championed a coalition of all different groups in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, where he was saying, hold on a second, we're not going to screen all these kids. And I think that legislation failed.
Yeah, screen kids, when you talk about the number of kids that are receiving, that are getting psychiatric drugs at this point, we can't do anything with it. If that's the number, if people realistically believe that that's the number of people that have some kind of mental illness that needs this so-called treatment, finding more of them is not going to solve any problem. We got too many of them already. And it's not hard, you know, if we wanted to find out at a very early age which kids are showing signs of being disturbed, there's plenty of things that teachers could do, but then where does it all go? If there's no pharmaceutical, the only place it goes is to the pharmaceutical industry. It's like, we have identified these kids so we can give them drugs. And that, let's just say, to my mind, and I'm nowhere near as deeply into this as you two, but that obviously is not working. Mm-hmm. It's simply not working. It's not working for kids. It's not working for adults.
Well, here, this is another element of this issue, though, because we know that 1 in 5 American adults, 1 in 5 is on at least one psychiatric drug, right? So the parents are on psych drugs. Mm-hmm. Why would they have a problem with their child being on them?
Just the opposite. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, it's almost a validation to say, I'm on them, my child has the same problems I do, whatever imbalance, to use that term.
The chemical imbalance.
Yeah, and the more people that are treated, the better I feel about the fact that I need the treatment myself.
Right, exactly, and it makes them. It's almost like, well, you know, it's hereditary.
Yeah.
You know, your behavior is because of me. You know, I've got depression, and so of course, you know, you do. It's ridiculous, but because there's no science to support that. This is why it's almost that you look at the medical community and you go, what are you doing? What are you doing? You got to tell people, you have to inform people of all sides of this issue. All right. It's not just, here, take this pill, you'll feel better. It's, some people feel better on these. However, on the other hand, some people experience, homicidality, abnormal behavior, violent behavior, go through the list. They don't do that. Medicine doesn't do that.
Well, Kelly, go ahead.
Thanks, Sheila. Psychiatry has an amazing history
Right.
Nobody accepts this anymore, but at the time it was completely accepted. But then suddenly the whole field just turned on a dime and said, no, the problem isn't your Oedipal complex, your conflicts, it's an imbalance in the brain. And now we have a whole different method. And they have never been able, let's say, they've never been able to admit the first thing you have to admit, which is we don't really understand.
Exactly.
The beginning of wisdom.
And that's why they use lawyer words like may and believe and,
Yeah.
you know.
I was going to say how I ended up in all of this is, I have two boys and my youngest one was 7. I was living in New Canaan, Connecticut, a very affluent town. And I was getting, the calls started coming in that my son was a problem in school. And I was like, I didn't know what to do, but then they said he had ADHD off of what Kelly was telling this checklist. And I'll never forget the night I was preparing for my IEP, where you go into school and there's all these, like, a whole team of people and you're the mom and they're telling you, yeah, your son's a real problem. And I was really scared that day. They were like, we think he has ADHD. Meanwhile, my doctor never told me that there was a problem with my son or anything, he was normal. And so all of a sudden I'm getting this diagnosis from the school and I'm preparing, and I turn on C-SPAN and I see this woman testifying in front of Congress. And she's saying that the school was doing the same thing to her and that she put her son on, I think, Paxil, and he ended up attacking her with a knife. I called Congress and I got her number, and I didn't even know this mother. And I called her and I said, I'm just about to head to school, and my God, what you were saying, they're doing the same thing to me. And I went into school and I said, I don't believe, after talking to her, and she was like, don't believe them. So I was like, I don't believe in ADHD. And that was how I got into this whole thing, Joe. I never put my son on drugs. But then what I did was I was shunned by my town for speaking out. I was did a story on Fox News, and I was on CNN. I started speaking out about the drugging of kids, and the other mothers wouldn't want my kid to be around. And one mother even called me and said, when are you going to put your kid on these drugs? And I was like, oh my God. So that's how I got involved. And I went up to the Capitol and I was testifying, and there was a woman, her kid was taken by the state, and she was in front of me, and she was from a poorer area in Connecticut. And she was showing me pictures of what her son had drew for her on the drugs. Now, the kid's in state care, he's on these drugs, and he draws this heart with snakes around it. I'll never forget it. And she was so upset. And I said, I'm not going to forget you. I'm not going to forget you. I'm going to stick with this. And it's become a passion of mine. And that mother actually is the mother in Newtown that invited me up after the Sandy Hook massacre, who called me and said, Sheila, you have to come here. And so about the pressure of the society, you got to get on this drug, and the pressure from the school, it was terrible.
Now, weren't you part of getting legislation passed that stops schools from being able to tell your kid that they need to be on a drug? You want to briefly talk about that?
That was the very first law that was of its kind. I didn't do it alone. I did it with parents across the country. And Patty Weathers, the mom that I called, it was a law that's attached to the No Child Left Behind Act, and it's called the Prohibition on Mandatory Medication. It's still law. And but of course they don't promote that, but it is a law. And if there's any parent listening, there is a law that protects you from the forced medication. And yeah, that was Patricia Weathers and myself, and then working with mothers across the country. and the human rights organization.
Great. It's
CCR.
great. I'm really proud of you for that. It's wonderful. And I know that it has helped other people. I'm going to wrap this up. I think I want to end it. Joe, in hindsight, now that you know more and as a legislator, what would you do differently?
Well, yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking about it through the whole show too, and I feel like I kind of blew my chance while I was there. One of the problems with being a legislator is you deal with what comes at you, and more comes at you than you can possibly handle. And because human services was kind of my field of specialty, that's where I put my time. I guess a legislator can make noise. You can't necessarily get a bill passed, but you can get attention in a way that a private citizen can't do.
Right.
And if I were going to do something differently, I would probably say, okay, I'll hold my own hearing and we'll talk about these issues, and I'll get what press I get, and I'll take what slings and arrows come my way. But I'll go ahead and give it a try and try to start to educate people about it. But it would be in Connecticut a very uphill fight to actually get enough people to pay attention to what you were talking about to be able to make a change in it. Sheila's priority about having the numbers, I remember the number for the adverse effects on the packaging. I always liked, because it was a small piece. It was like a doable piece, but it's not a piece that any of us believe is the answer to the thing all by itself. But and that's another thing you have to ask is, do I want to say I'll take a little tiny piece at a time, or do I want to try to make a big noise and see if I can move people
Right.
in a mass? So my answer is, I don't know what I'd do, but I would be a little more aggressive on this subject, since I really do believe I'm more convinced. The other thing is you learn more as time goes on, and you don't always know what you need to know at the moment that you were there to take advantage of it. But I am convinced it's one of the biggest problems in our society.
I started writing about this when I was a reporter for the Washington Times. I did the article Guns and Doses. I was the first national reporter to report on the connection between psych drugs and school shooters. The last 11 or 12 school shooters was the only thing they had in common after I did my investigation. So that was in 1999. I personally have been writing about it. I wrote a book about it. And I know that there are organizations out there, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights has been dogged on this issue. That's what they live and die for this issue. There's plenty of information out there, okay, over the last, 30 years. And I'm not certain that we're going to get to where we need to get in time to stop it again. And again, everybody has to realize there's no agenda here. We don't hope the kid was on psychiatric drugs. That's not something you want, but we believe you're entitled to have that information. When little kids are killed, when people are killed, all the protections that shooter had go out the window. And the public deserves, I believe, the public deserves to know if they have been on prescribed psychiatric drugs. Or what if he was on fentanyl? What if he was on meth? Don't you want to know that? Of course the public wants to know that, but especially if he was on prescribed drugs, because that's where we're going in mental health. We no longer have compassion. I'm gonna throw this out here and let me know what you think. When people used to be upset or depressed or sad, friends were empathetic. There was some compassion, right? When guys came home from war, there was some compassion among their friends and family for what they were going through. We don't have that anymore. Why? Because we have a pill. If you take this pill, you're going to be great. We don't need to be compassionate anymore. This pill will fix everything that you're feeling.
And if you don't take the pill, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
off your
exactly.
meds. That's the problem. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Sheila, I know that you and I are going to continue looking into this Uvalde, Texas shooting and see where it goes. And Joe, I want to thank you for all of your support. I hope that you continue to, stand for, getting some answers to these questions as far as toxicology reports for these families. And any last words on your behalf?
I appreciate the chance to talk to you. Just even if nobody were watching, it's a very interesting conversation for me. And if there's anything I can do, and Sheila, you know where to get me now again. So if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And I have hopes. I've been working with a candidate for Congress quite closely. So if I get him in, I'll make sure that Kelly has a chance to bend his ear.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good.
And I just have to say that, Joe, you were a light in a time when there was a lot of darkness up there, and you did champion for my organization and other organizations. You got a wonderful reputation. You're such a nice gentleman. You listen to everybody, and it really was up against what we were up against. You were the little door that was open, and I will always remember that, and I will take you up on that and call you when I need you.
Please do. Thank you.
Great. Sheila, Joe, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it more than you know, and hopefully we get some people to look at this and start asking some questions themselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you
for your work,
Kelly.
All right.
Appreciate it.